Hello ladies and gents, it's EZScape. A common question I get on a lot of my videos is, EZScape, why are speedrunners always playing on Japanese releases? Oh, never mind. I see the waifu in the splits. It all makes sense now. Okay, no, this isn't the real reason why. Majority of speedrunners can't speak Japanese no matter how many times they watch subbed anime. The most common reason you'll hear why speedrunners use Japanese versions is because the text scrolls a lot faster. Since less characters need to be used on JP, it usually means that less text needs to be mashed through, which can save quite a bit of time over the span of an entire speedrun. This is the same case in a lot of RPGs, where setting the main character's name to one letter will save several seconds throughout the duration of a speedrun. In present day, you're probably used to seeing Australians getting a hold of games before everyone else, but this wasn't always the case. Back in my day, most video games got released in Japan first, and then a couple of months later the games would head to other regions. This gave developers time to receive feedback for their games and patch any unnecessary glitches, sequence breaks, graphical errors, whatever. But sometimes changes are made to games because of localization. Obviously there's a huge difference between Japanese and Western culture, so sometimes entire scenes, characters, and areas may be altered so a given audience can better understand and relate to the gameplay. Also, suggestive themes in video games intended for all audiences are treated differently region to region, such as turning a cigarette into a lollipop, or maybe removing a gun altogether and seeing if anyone notices. And sometimes it really isn't that deep. The localization team might just notice a piece of content missing and make changes accordingly. For example, over a year ago, I was grinding the absolute worst game that I've ever speedran, Dino Crisis 1. Back then, I was a young inspired boy, just trying to beat the long-standing 18-year world record. So the first thing I checked with a lot of other games I speedrun was which console had the fastest load times, and which version of the game was the fastest. I ended up finding an old Japanese segmented speedrun of the game, where not only the text was faster in a handful of areas, but for some reason in a box sliding puzzle, the Japanese version was missing a box that the NTSC version had. These boxes took 10 to 11 seconds to push, so just by playing the Japanese version, I'd be saving roughly 30 seconds in total. But why was the box not there? I still think about this to this day. But again, it's most likely that someone just forgot about it, then put it in by the time the NTSC and PAL versions were released. So in today's video, I want to go over some of the prominent cases where Japanese version saves or loses time in a bunch of different games, and go over all the subtle differences. I hope you all enjoy. So to start this off, I want to begin with this obscure game that I'm not sure a lot of people have heard of before. It's called Super Mario 64. If you've ever watched a speedrun of this game, you've probably seen it played on both Japanese and NTSC versions, depending on the category. When I first noticed this, I thought that some of the top runners in 70 star just didn't mind the time loss, and the 0 and 120 star runners were just tryhards running on their Japanese copies. But I later found that the Japanese version was indeed faster in the 0 and 120 star categories, but NTSC was faster for 70 star. This is specifically because the text boxes in the 70 star route are actually faster on NTSC by roughly 3 seconds, and the text boxes in the 120 star route are faster on JP by 8 seconds. Also, for some reason in Jolly Roger Bay, the star blast through the stone pillar is in a box in the NTSC version, but in JP the star is out in the open, which saves an additional 4 seconds. However, I think the most interesting thing about the Super Mario 64 releases is the Shindo version, an updated Japanese release of the game that came out a year after the original. The selling point with this version is that it was compatible with the N64 Rumble Pack, and while there were a few minor bug fixes and changes, not many had any serious implications for speedrunning, except for one, which was a cap added to Mario's speed when moving backwards. This effectively made backwards long jumping impossible to be performed, as well as all of the other methods used for building up negative speed. Another game which is drastically different on the Japanese release is the original Spyro the Dragon. First of all, look at the box art. What the hell is going on? Why does he look like that? But this isn't even the worst part. For some reason, in order to appeal to a broader Japanese audience, the camera is extremely zoomed out and doesn't follow Spyro around, presumably to avoid motion sickness. Not only that, but they severely lowered his charging speed to the point it's nearly as fast as a walking speed from the NTSC release. Like, I am all for accessibility in video games, especially since in this era, 3D platformers with active cameras were just becoming popular, so it makes sense that people would be getting motion sickness if they weren't used to it. But why would they ever make an accessibility option the default way to play the game, while also making it impossible to be switched off until after the player has, well in this case, completed 120% of the game? No wonder why this game sold terribly in Japan. So far during my research, it seems the game with the most differences between the Japanese and NTSC releases would have to be Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. So far, the community has discovered 107 differences between the releases and are still finding new ones to this day. If we look through the list, some of the most detrimental changes to speedrunning would have to be the platforms in the sewers, which don't move as far to the left and right as the ones in the NTSC version, making the Goomba trio skip impossible to be performed on JP. Also, a lot of the enemies in the game can't be super guarded on JP, so a lot of fights have to be rerouted completely. On JP, you can't heal after completing chapters except for chapter 1, whereas on NTSC you can heal after every single chapter. Another difference is the flurry super slide glitch, which works differently in both versions, allowing for different tricks. On JP, Mario moves slightly up before going fully downwards, whereas on NTSC, you either go left or right. This allows for a few Japanese exclusive skips, like Ultra Hammer Early and Teleporter Room Early. I've only mentioned 5 out of the 107 changes. If you want to check out the full list, it will be in the description. But still, it's pretty crazy just how much a game can change with different releases. In the Thousand Year Door's case, it's almost like you're not even playing the same game. But not all games have huge differences like the Thousand Year Door. In Final Fantasy IX, there are some pretty minor changes like damage values being different for certain moves, but the weirdest change to me is that if you impress 100 nobles on NTSC during the sword fight minigame, you get 10,000 gil for impressing the crowd. But on Japanese, you only get 1,000, meaning on JP there's basically no reason to stress trying to win the minigame perfectly. And then there's Super Mario World, which barely has any differences between the versions, except that on the NTSC release, you can't eat dolphins. But in the Japanese version, you can.
Okay.
Final Fantasy VII was initially released in Japan in January of 1997, and it wouldn't be until September of that year that it would get released to North America. In that time, there were a lot of changes made to the game. First of all, encounter rates were lowered in most areas, and since the current speedrun depends on utilizing a step counter to manipulate encounters, this change would alter the speedrun route immensely. Also, this really only affects the 100% speedrun, but the Diamond, Ruby, and Emerald weapon boss fights weren't added until the international release. Menu screens were also changed with the international version, so you could see your party status while filtering through items, and the exchange option for materia was added. With the international version, there was also a myriad of bug fixes, added cutscenes, stat balancing, and new features. The original JP version of the game honestly just seemed unfinished, but luckily the international version got re-released in Japan in late 1997, which is the version every Japanese speedrunner plays on now, with pretty much all of the same changes as the NTSC release. For Kingdom Hearts 2, the Japanese and NTSC speedruns are very different, but only because of one glitch which exists on JP, which basically takes over the whole speedrun. The Trinity limit in Kingdom Hearts 2 was not coded properly, and for some reason at any point, if you do a large number of hits with the Trinity limit, the game will remember that hit counter for the rest of the playthrough, and the next time the move is used, it will use that same number of hits you got previously. So say if you build up a large number of hits with the Trinity limit early in the speedrun, you can maintain that hit counter for the rest of the run, making it possible to defeat a lot of bosses in one shot. Due to accessibility reasons, the Japanese version isn't nearly as commonly ran, but if it were, it would most likely be the fastest version for speedrunning the game. Despite Ape Escape 2 being released in Japan nearly a full year before anywhere else, the Japanese version is by far the superior way to play the game. It saves time in the all monkeys category, since the Japanese version has 3 less monkeys. But the main difference between the versions is quick item switching, which is only possible in JP. In the top right of the game screen, you can see a quick swap menu. In the Japanese release, it's possible to open an additional menu while still playing to change which items are in the quick swap menu. For some reason on the international version, this isn't possible, and instead you have to stop playing and open up a pop-up menu to change items on the quick swap menu. This both wastes time and it kind of messes with the flow of the speedrun. In Ape Escape 3, quick item switching was available on all releases, so I'm not exactly sure why they removed it for specifically the international version of Ape Escape 2. Much like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, Bomberman Hero has a plethora of differences between the Japanese and NTSC releases. Some of the most notable differences include resetting the console after defeating each boss to skip the bonus stages. In the JP version, all of your power-ups stay after doing so, but in NTSC you lose them, making skipping bonus stages waste time instead of saving it. All of the bosses on NTSC take way more hits to beat, and in some cases can take up to twice the usual number of hits. On NTSC, there are also way more hazards and enemies, and health pickups are a lot more scarce, making for a much more difficult speedrun. There are also quite a few version exclusive skips, like an auto-scroller skip on Hard Coaster on NTSC, and a way to skip the giant crab boss fight on JP. If you want to check out the full list of differences, they'll be linked in the description. In the Japanese version of Kirby Airride, all of the vehicles are slightly lighter. Not only this, but they also move a little bit faster and skid further when slowing down compared to the NTSC version. This alone doesn't affect the speedrun all too much, but it does allow for a momentum glitch exclusive to the Japanese version. On the course Checker Nights, it's possible to maintain momentum gained with a boost pad after hitting a small root sticking out of the ground to chain into several other boost pads. This trick saves 5 seconds each lap and 15 seconds in total. And with the rest of the time save in the Japanese version, JP is roughly 30 to 40 seconds faster, which is a lot of time to save in a racing game, where most of the time, you'll only be saving a handful of seconds each personal best. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, as it's the best way to show support. I don't know why, but I think version differences in video games are just really interesting, especially the ones with speedrunning implications. But in modern gaming, this is probably something we're going to start seeing a lot less of. But I guess this does open the door for making a part 2, covering the differences between NTSC and PAL, which I'm looking forward to making. Anyways guys, that's it for this video. Go follow me on Twitch and Twitter if you want, and subscribe for more speedrunning related content. I hope you all have a beautiful life.